Madam Speaker, at the risk of oversimplification, this debate is a bit of an anomaly. In many parts of the world, countries are struggling with little or no economic growth. Governments are racking their best brains on how to spur growth, create jobs, and balance their books. Here, despite economic slowdown in countries like the US and the EU, we are in a happy position of having a generally tight labour market, a sound fiscal position, and substantial household wealth. Yet, there are many voices urging the government to pursue lower growth targets, while many elsewhere are crying out for a diametrically opposite outcome. The reason is that many Singaporeans think that the cost of growth is too much to bear and prefer less to more. Less growth, lower immigration, lower house prices, less congestion, etc. These are real concerns that must be addressed. At the same time, we are facing a demographic time bomb that creates a conundrum for us. How and to what extent can we reverse the population decline from low TFR while safeguarding Singaporeans' interests and maintaining an environment that supports a high quality of life? Underlying this conundrum is the fundamental question implicit in the population white paper. What kind of Singapore do we want? Contrary to what some critics have charged, the population white paper is not fixated with economic growth per se. Economic growth is never and should never be an end in itself. The white paper is in fact about Singaporeans, about ensuring Singaporeans' well-being into the future. It seeks to enable Singaporeans to continue to live in a harmonious society with strong, supportive families, good jobs, and a good quality of life. By any account, the paper's assumption of GDP growth of 3 to 5% up to 2020, falling to 2 to 3% in the next decade, is less than half of the 5.6% average annual growth in the 2000s and the 7% growth in the 2 decades prior. Partly, the reduced GDP numbers recognize that with a higher base today, and as we mature further, our economy cannot grow at the elevated levels we have enjoyed previously. Equally important, it also highlights that the premise of the white paper is not a growth at all cost strategy. That growth and the increase in foreign workforce accompanying that growth must be socially sustainable. The Workers' Party has proposed to moderate the GDP growth projections in the white paper down by 0.5 to 1%, thereby bringing the GDP growth to 2.5 to 3.5% per year up to 2020 and 1.5 to 2.5% per year in the next decade. They assume similar productivity growth assumptions of 2 to 3% per annum this decade and 1 to 2% per annum next decade. But, and this seems to be the key plank of their program, they propose to grow the resident workforce by at least 1% per annum by encouraging older workers, foreign spouses, and economically inactive women to join the workforce. With this, they project that the population in 2030 will be 5.9 million or 1 million less than the 6.9 million figure in the paper. The Honourable Member for Aljunied has a point. We should tap on the pool of older workers, back-to-work women, and foreign spouses for our workforce. Already, foreign spouses who are on LVTP+ are allowed to work. Also, we have been promoting the employment of older workers and encouraging economically inactive women to return to work, with a host of initiatives such as the Special Employment Credit Advantage FlexiWorks and WOW, and will continue to strengthen these schemes. The employment of older workers aged 65 to 69 years, for instance, at 36.9% as at 2012, is one of the highest in the world and behind only South Korea and Japan. In fact, our assumptions for the resident workforce percentage point contribution to total workforce growth, which is at 0.07% for the rest of this decade, have already taken into account that more older workers, women, etc., will continue to work or return to work. So one doubts how much more we could increase the workforce through this means. In the next decade, our projections of the resident workforce growth is close to zero, as the number of Singaporeans expected to join the workforce is barely enough to offset the numbers expected to leave the workforce. Any increase in TFR, if we are successful in our efforts to this end, will only be felt after 2030, since baby borns, even this year, would only be 17 years of age by 2030. Hence, it will be useful to understand how the Workers' Party proposes to grow the resident workforce by at least 1% per annum. Based on the Workers' Party's proposal of moderating GDP growth, the corresponding total workforce growth actually works out to 0.5% per annum for the next 2 decades. This is less than 1/6 of the 3.3% total workforce growth over the last 30 years. Based on our estimates, our residents' workforce contribution to total labour force growth could reach 0.7% per annum up to 2020, whilst WP proposes to grow this by at least 1% per annum, and yet only have 0.5% total workforce growth from now till 2030. If this were so, is the WP proposing having no or negative growth in foreign workers each year from now till 2030, or perhaps lesser immigrants? Businesses are already feeling the pain of tighter foreign manpower restrictions over the last few years. They have collectively expressed horror over the White Paper's projected slowdown in workforce growth to about 1 to 2% in this decade and then to 1% in the next decade. Many companies, especially SMEs, are reportedly scrapping expansion plans or thinking of moving out their plants. They are understandably worried that further foreign manpower restrictions will cripple their businesses. Whilst raising productivity through innovation, technology and process improvement can help reduce their dependence on labour, there is also a limit as to how far this can go. Already the productivity targets of 2 to 3% per annum till 2020 and then 1 to 2% after 2020 to 2030 are stretch targets. By comparison, we have on average only managed productivity growth of just 1.8% per annum over the last decade. This is despite generous incentives for companies to take advantage of and numerous discussions with business groups and employers to refine the schemes and ease the path for firms to assess them. Hence, the WP's proposal to sharply cut workforce growth to 0.5% per annum would exact punishing costs on our local businesses and even some as MNCs, and in fact, there will be flow-through on costs to the average Singaporeans. Under this scenario, many companies are likely to fold or move out of Singapore, whilst others will not be attracted to set up shop here, resulting in fewer jobs for Singaporeans. Hence, to curb immigration or foreign workforce growth with such a proposal in order to help safeguard Singaporeans could, in an ironic twist, hurt the very people this reversal is intended to help. It will be instructive to find out from our WP MPs what this proposed 0.5% per annum workforce will translate into in terms of growth in resident and foreign workforce, as well as the number of new citizens and PRs per year. Be that as it may be, we are also committed to continue to look at ways to further improve productivity, increase our resident labour force participation rate, and of course increase our TFR so that we can reduce the need to augment our population and workforce with new immigrants and foreign workers. This could then result in a lower population than projected in the future. One of the key goals of the Population White Paper is to maintain a strong Singaporean core. But what does it mean to maintain a strong Singaporean core? Who forms this Singaporean core? I submit that the Singaporean core must comprise all Singapore citizens, local born or otherwise, who have pledged allegiance to Singapore and share our key values such as hard work, meritocracy, and multiculturalism. Singapore has historically been an immigrant society and has benefited from the diversity and energy that new citizens bring. New citizens drawn to the peace, harmony, and security Singapore has to offer will need time to adjust to life here. As strangers in a strange land, they will continue to seek comfort among their own kind, inasmuch as Singaporeans tend to cluster when we live or work overseas. Their backgrounds, habits, and cultural norms may sometimes puzzle us or even grate us. We need to develop a healthy sense of mutual respect, not to allow differences to divide. This should also not detract us from what they can offer. Indeed, Singapore will not be a thriving city it is without the contributions of our forefathers, most of whom were migrants. Many new citizens continue to make good contributions to Singapore. Hence, all citizens should be treated equally and with respect, as they have made the conscious decision to take up the pink identity card and forge a common future with us here. It is unhelpful and unfair to distinguish between local-born Singaporeans, or as the Honourable Member of our unit said yesterday, indigenous Singaporeans, and new citizens, and cast doubts on the loyalty of the latter. To do so will generate a sense of unwelcome to future groups of people who seek to build their lives and families here. Like many in this house, I myself was not born in Singapore, but I decided to cast my lot with Singaporeans. So does that make me any less of a Singaporean citizen than someone born in Singapore? As much as any new citizen could pack up and leave Singapore, so could any other Singaporean. Instead, we should continue to enhance our integration efforts to help new citizens adapt to our Singaporean way of life and sink deep roots while adding to Singapore's rich diversity. It will take time, perhaps one generation, for the children of these new citizens to undergo the same rites of passage as our homegrown children, schooling and national service, to develop a strong Singapore identity. As DPM Teo and many others in this house has noted, the best way to strengthen the Singaporean core must be to encourage Singaporeans, new and old, to marry and have children. The Marriage and Parenthood Package was first introduced in 2001 and then enhanced in 2005 and 2008 to strengthen the pro-family environment in Singapore. The latest round of new measures and enhancements announced is the third incarnation of the Marriage and Parenthood Package and has taken extensive feedback received from Singaporeans over the past year. It will increase the cost of the package from $1.6 billion to $2 billion a year. The enhanced package includes measures which signal paradigm shifts such as paternity leave and MediShield for newly diagnosed congenital and neonatal conditions. Hence, far from being half-hearted in promoting marriage and parenthood, as the Honourable Members Sylvia Lim and Paisha Manap have claimed, I would say that the government has put much effort and heart to promote marriage and parenthood. The Honourable Member, Ms. Sylvia Lim, brought up the example of South Korea as a country that have successfully reversed their falling TFR from 1.08 in 2005 to 1.23 in 2010. She highlighted some measures adopted by the Korean government which could have contributed to their success, such as an institutional support for family life and promoting gender equality within the family. I thank her for highlighting this example, but I would like to note that the NPTD, in crafting the Marriage and Parenthood Package, has in fact looked quite exhaustively at the policies of many countries, including South Korea, and will continue to monitor them. Whilst it is commendable that South Korea has managed to raise its TFR to 1.23 in 2010, and in fact 1.24 in 2011, this is still far below the replacement rate and not much higher than that of Singapore's 1.2 in 2011. In fact, I understand that the preliminary estimates of the TFR for 2012 in Korea is 1.23. This compares to our estimate of between 1.28 to 1.3 for 2012 due to the Dragon Year effect. Moreover, while Singapore is a city-state, South Korea is a large country, and one would expect that the TFR within a major city like Seoul could well be lower. Undoubtedly, the government will continue with its efforts to promote marriage and parenthood as a fundamental means to strengthen the Singaporean core. But clearly, based on the experiences of other countries, reversal in TFR is a challenge and will take time. We will need all Singaporeans to do their part for this to happen. Many Singaporeans have expressed discomfort, not just with the projected upper bound population of 6.9 million in 2030, but also that Singapore's citizen population is estimated to comprise only 55% of the total population in 2030. Will we Singaporeans be strangers in our own land? Will this irrevocably change the character of our society and dilute our national identity, as the WP has also argued? Will we eventually become like the Middle East oil states, where locals constitute only 10% of the entire population, and the rest are contract workers with all the attendant social problems this might bring? This is a legitimate concern, but somewhat misplaced, because as noted by DPM Teo, the 6.5 to 6.9 million population figures are estimates, with the 6.9 as the worst-case scenario necessary for planning purposes. If we succeed in reversing the TFR, improving productivity beyond our targets, harnessing technology and innovation, as well as get more older workers and women joining the workforce, then our population may not reach 6.9 million, and the number of foreigners allowed in will be lower. As DPM Teo noted, if we can ensure the well-being of Singaporeans with a smaller population, whether 6.5 million or lower, there is no reason to go higher. But it is prudent to plan our infrastructure at the upper end of the range so that we do not get caught up. Moreover, the Singaporean core itself is not homogeneous like the Middle East or Japan. The core, in fact, comprises several ethnic groups with distinct characteristics, but which are bound together by common experiences and shared values. It has always been porous, allowing others to enter and enlarge the core. We should be mindful of not creating an us and me and them mentality. Madam Speaker, the polarized reactions to the population white paper by individual Singaporeans and businesses shows dilemma that both the government and all Singaporeans have to grapple with. The government is taking a bold step to bring this highly contentious topic to the table for Singaporeans to debate, fully cognizant that it will generate much heat, as indeed it has, when many other governments have largely chosen to shy away from the issue. This goes to show that our aging and shrinking population that will affect the future of Singaporeans and Singapore is a matter of grave concern to the government. We do not want to shirk from our responsibility by sidelining strategic issues. It is important to surface this issue early and plan ahead. The white paper lays the foundation and guides the demographic course for our nation, so that our young people today can have a good future tomorrow. It is as much about building a sustainable population for a dynamic Singapore as it is about a dynamic population for a sustainable Singapore. The two are intertwined. Madam, I support the motion.